And we are live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Pass the Mic webinar. Today, we will be talking about adoption and cloud maturity with our good friend, Marc Anderson. But before we get started with that, a few little things we wanted to point out. We already have a few questions already asking if this session will be recorded. Good news, it will be recorded. Since you registered to the event, we will be sending you an email most likely tomorrow with the recording of the session. So don't worry, you won't miss anything. You'll be able to rewatch it on demand. And there will be a Q&A at the end with Marc, so I will ask Marc your questions. So go ahead, use the Q&A feature, ask your questions. We'll take good note of them, and we'll try to keep about a 15 to 10 minutes, depends if Marc is disciplined and is able to fit all the content in 45 minutes. But if we can't answer all the questions, usually what we try to do is get the answers offline and send them to you with the recording of the webinar. So quick word in regards to the Pass the Mic series. Today is our second edition of the Pass the Mic series, right? So it's officially a series. So essentially what we try to do is we try to stay in contact with you. We ask you questions. We want to know what are your challenges, what are some of the things you need to overcome, some of your pain points you're having. Yeah, we try to invite some of our good friends and industry experts to tackle those questions and share some insights to help you. So if there's any topics you would like us to cover in the following Pass the Mic webinars, you can write to us, or the easiest way is to go on our social media networks and just ask us there. So enough talking about, oh, actually, no, I just want to mention also that the first edition of the Pass the Mic series was with Andy Honeycutt, another of our good friends. And we talked about the topic of end user training. So we know it was a pretty busy year adopting new technology. So maybe we didn't have all the time necessary to train all of our users. Now that the dust is settling a little bit, Andy shared some insight on how to tackle end user training in your organizations. Now it's time to I'm just seeing some comments up there.
There we go. I was having a little technical problem. I'm supposed to be the guy who knows how to push buttons, right?
All right, but we're just getting started. We're just getting warmed up, so that's normal. Yeah, I guess now is the time to introduce our hosts. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm not going to be running the show. Marc is going to be the star of the show, but I figured it would still be the polite thing to do for me to introduce myself. My name is Laurent Saint-Pierre, but everybody calls me Larry. I've been working at ShareGate for over 6 years now. And yeah, just working with everyone in the community, working with Benjamin a lot, and yeah, working with partners. And yeah, I've had the chance to work with a great community in the Microsoft community, meet a lot of great people, just like our good friend, Marc Anderson. How are you doing this morning, Marc?
I'm well, Larry. You're an integral part of the ShareGate social community machine. I mean, it wouldn't be what it is without you. So yeah, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, well, thank you. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's I've tried to do my part over the years, and it's a bit fun. Marc, over the years, I've learned to know you, but obviously you know yourself way better. So I'll let you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit of your background.
Sure, I've met myself a few times, so I have a little insight. So my name's Marc Anderson. I'm president and co-founder of Simpraxis Consulting. We're a virtual organization. We're actually spread around the globe a little bit, but we focus entirely on Microsoft 365 and SharePoint. And we're all sort of SharePoint people from way back, so you'll probably hear a little bit of a slant about SharePoint from me because it's one of my first loves. So. And I've been working on this Microsoft maturity model for Microsoft 365 with a really bright bunch of people: Simon Doy, Simon Hudson, Emily Mancini, Sharon Weaver, lots of guest stars and hosts and stuff. So, you know, a lot of what we'll be going through today is really a group effort. I'm here to talk about it, but there's been a lot of contribution from a lot of people. So I'm going to want to make sure you don't think this is all me, because it really isn't.
Cool. Alrighty. So what are we going to be talking about today? Obviously, adoption and cloud maturity. But yeah, exactly. What are we going to be covering today?
So I think we want to talk about a number of topics. I mean, I think the key here is to think about how do you use these tools well in service of accomplishing what your strategy dictates, right? So why do you want to think about doing things better, and how can you sort of break down that thinking into digestible bites so you know where to go? A lot of people have moved to the cloud by sort of lifting up what's in a file share and dropping it into SharePoint Online, for example. And that in itself doesn't really solve anything. So we have a model here that we're gonna talk about that helps you think through, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, and what are some some specific steps that you can take. And in doing that, you of course want to think about, well, how do we know that we're doing well? So having some strategies for measuring how people are taking things up and how things are improving, as well as practitioners, as people who are in charge of the use of the platform in our organization. How do we know that we're doing the right thing? It's stuff that we think about it as consultants all the time. When I walked in, they were here, and when I left, they were there. What's the delta? And hopefully there is one, because you want to make sure that you're leaving people in better shape than they were when you got there. So we'll talk through some hopefully very pretty concrete steps about how you can get further along. These concepts apply almost independently from the technologies, but in each competency that we'll talk about, we actually have some typical applications that are part of that, part of the execution on that competency. Obviously Teams is a big part of that. There are a lot of people moving to Teams, and they don't necessarily think about, well, what does that mean? We're going to give everybody this tool. How do we make sure that people don't always think about, well, now that we've given people this tool, how can we help them get better at what they do through the use of the tool, as opposed to, are people just using the tool, which doesn't mean much of anything. Hopefully that all made some sense.
It does, yeah. And I mean, talking, as a lot of different topics, there's always this, and of course it applies here in the context of adoption and cloud maturity. But it's something we hear a lot on different conversations, is this question of mindset, right? So of course, you've got new technology. We always, the reflex is to I guess, look at the bells and whistles, look at the functionality, but I guess there's always this question of mindset in there, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think people sometimes think, well, we'll just roll out this technology and everything will transform. And like I said, sometimes people's move to the cloud, to Microsoft 365, is just picking up a bunch of file shares and dropping them into SharePoint, or through the Teams UI effectively into SharePoint. That in itself isn't going to solve anything. You want to be thinking about what are the outcomes that we're looking for. Why are we even moving to the cloud? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And shutting down your servers is not necessarily a business outcome, right? I mean, it often is part of the benefit, but it's not really a very good reason from an end user perspective to move to this server in the sky, right? The technologies themselves can only solve the things that you apply those technologies to, and I think that's an important thing for people to realize. When you think about sort of on-prem versus cloud, in a lot of ways, these maturity ideas that we're talking about apply equally. If you're on-prem or you're in the cloud, you can be using these tools well, or you can just be using them because they're there. And so I think we try to abstract out the concepts and the maturity model that are about organizational efficiency, organizational communication and collaboration, and then talk about the tools. Because whether you're on-prem or on the cloud, you know, your organization ought to be getting something out of using these tools. But at the same time, when you do move from on-prem to the cloud, and you know, we always use ShareGate's wonderful desktop product for that. There's a plug for you. I'm a huge fan. But once you've done that migration, that transformation, that sort of journey is not over. You know, you've lifted up the content, you lifted up what you've used before, and you've moved it into SharePoint Online, for example. And now how do you think about how people are going to use those tools? What's going to be different about what they do than it was, you know, the week before? And so there's a bit of a different mindset from the perspective of, you know, you've got access through the browser from anywhere generally. You know, how do you think about security? How do you think about collaboration? How do you know, now that we're in this very strange global pandemic world of hybrid work, you know, how do you think about people being anywhere and working on things together? So, you know, the launching the technology is, in a sense, I mean, the IT folks who are in charge of doing these things are going to sort of think I'm an idiot for saying this, but that's almost the easy part. Right? You launch the technology, and then what changes? What happens? How can you get better as an organization at what you actually do?
No, definitely that makes a lot of sense. And like talking about governance, obviously we're big fans or big advocates for the importance of governance. That's why we included some functionalities in ShareGate about it. What do you think is the role of governance when it comes to adoption and cloud maturity?
We've sort of woven governance into everything in the maturity model. We haven't called it out as a separate thing other than within each competency, because I think they're sort of, to me, there's always two layers of governance. There's the soft side, the sort of it's like a folksonomy, right? It's how should people in the organization think about these technologies? What are the general rules? You know, what kind of content should go there? And then there's the more hard, sort of what I think of as the harder governance. You know, how many teams do we have? Who's using them? What's the most recent interaction that's gone on there? Are we using the licenses that we have? That to me is a harder set of stuff. The stuff that you typically are going to run reports or monitor and look at metrics for. So in the cloud, we have much better tools, I believe, from when we were on-prem that help us understand, well, how is our organization using this thing, and how can we monitor whether we're getting our money's worth, whether we're actually seeing differences in people's performance and efficiency from the use of these technologies. But I think that softer side is really, really important. We need to make sure that people have just this common mindset. You know, how does our organization think about collaboration? How does our organization think about security? You can write all the governance documents in the world and squirrel them away in some document library somewhere, but nobody's going to read them. So there's a sort of on the softer side, to me, it's like a socialization effort. And you also want to distribute a lot of that governance thinking. You know, it's sort of train the trainer thing, right? You want to have some group of people who are sort of deciding how you're going to use these technologies, and then make sure that you sort of multiply that out through your site owners, through your subject matter experts, through your community leaders, so that that mindset continues to grow and evolve throughout the organization. So governance is a big thing, but I think it's got to be part of everything that you do from a maturity perspective.
Yeah, so that softer side essentially is kind of like the foundation on which you can build those more kind of hands-on practices.
Right. And I think we see that, you know, a lot of people think governance is done when they write that document, but then they never measure anything. And if they don't measure anything, how do they know that they're doing any better? And we talk about that in the maturity model, and I'll show some specific examples there. So really what we're thinking about when we're using Microsoft 365, to me, and I've felt this way all the way back to SharePoint 2003, we really want to change the way we work, not give somebody a tool that just lets them do a couple of things. It's how can we actually change the structure and the function of the way we work because we have these tools. So, why are we using Microsoft 365? What benefits do we expect to get out of it? And hopefully then we have some metrics that we're going to use around it. So,
yeah, and to that, yeah, no, that's fine. To that cloud maturity concept, of course, like we had the chance to talk about it a little bit before the webinar, and not to spoil anything, but you've worked with a lot of people in the Microsoft community to work on this cloud maturity framework. Yeah, can you speak a little bit to that concept of cloud maturity?
Yeah, I think that because the interfaces and the tools are moving at such a rapid pace. When we're on-prem, and even on-prem today, you're sort of in a 3-year product cycle. And when you're in the cloud, it's a constantly evolving environment. And not only are there enhancements and improvements to the existing tools that you've got, there are new tools that come out, new apps and services. And so you need to be thinking about all the time what's changing, what's coming up, how will that impact our organization? How should we promote that? Or and I hate to say, but sometimes people turn things off just because they're scared of it. That's not governance. That's fear. You want to make sure that you're not preventing people from using things, but helping them use things so that they can be as productive and secure and safe and all of the good stuff that your governance would dictate. So I think the cloud's constant adaptation is really one of the biggest changes to think about. You can't act as a lot of IT organizations have in the past, where you roll out the next version of SharePoint. You've got 3 years before you really have to talk to your users all that much again. This is an ongoing daily sort of improvement and evolution cycle. So that the maturity of dealing with that, the maturity of helping people understand what the benefits are and what's coming are, I think, really important. So we have to sometimes throw away the way we did things. I work with clients all the time who say, well, we have to have it do this, and it's like, well, why? Well, that's the way we've always done it. Aha. That's an answer I could work with, right? So you really want to think about, especially since you're going from, as if you're in the IT pro role, you're going from managing the technology, making sure that the servers are up and they're backed up, and what I think of as dial tone in essence, to how do we utilize this platform and make it more productive for the organization. That's a very different mindset. You can't just think about it the same way you always have. You want to make sure you're innovating. You want to make sure you're getting value for your investment, and think about organizations succeeding in new ways. That's innovation. That's really thinking about, well, given that we have this new fabric that underlies the way we're working, what can we do differently that makes us better than we've been in the past and better than our competitors have been? So to sort of dive into the maturity model specifically, and we'll have all kinds of links for you at the end of this presentation, but there's a source at the bottom here. So each of the competencies in the maturity model that we've got is the fundamental core of it is a very long article that talks about what is this thing about? What is an overview of the concept? How do we define it? What are some of the tool sets that are useful for it? So here we're looking at the collaboration competency article. And so we define what collaboration it is. It's people working together to reach a common goal. Very simple, right? That makes it sound like we can get that done in an afternoon, right? But we use all kinds of tools to make that work. We use Teams, we use SharePoint, we use Outlook, we use OneNote, we use OneDrive, we use Yammer. So not not a lot of this is focused on one single product. It's a whole bunch of stuff in the suite that really can enable this particular competency. And then, the rest of the article is talking about, well, what does it look like if you're at this level? What does it look like if you're at this level? And some of the hints as to how you can get from one place to the other. So we created this thing based on some fantastic work that Sadie Van Buren did early in the 2010s. I think her first official version of the SharePoint maturity model came out in 2010 or 2011, and was just a really smart way to think about how do you get better at using SharePoint. And we've tried to expand that to Microsoft 365. It's just a much broader spectrum now of things that we can talk about. So it's a lot of the why, not the how, right? It's not about, go and make sure that you've set up a result source for search and that it does this and this and this. It's about why are you doing things? Why are you using these tools, and how do they fit into the fabric of your organization? It's also, what we intend for it to do is give you a better way to understand the benefits and the impact you can get from using the platform, and give you some specific ways to get to those. A lot of the time people will migrate that content into SharePoint, again as the example, and then they'll say, well, when's the magic going to happen? Well, the magic doesn't happen because you're not actively shining up the wand and feeding the rabbit to pull out of the hat, right? You have to do some work in order to make that benefit happen. So another thing about it is it's a framework. I am a skeptic from way back. I don't believe in frameworks. I don't believe in business books. I don't believe in anything as itself. I look at what this maturity model is as a set of tools and ways to think that you can use in order to use the platform better. It's an important thing to sort of understand where you are. How well are you doing? How well you want to do, and what's the delta? How do you get there? So what are the options that we have to solve business problems better? How can we focus our energies? As an organization of type X, well, do we have to think about, being a level 500, the top level in security, or are we comfortable with level 200 or level 300, which is more toward the middle? Every organization is going to think about these things a little bit differently, and that's good, right? This framework doesn't say you have to go from level 100 to level 500 in every single organization. It's more about, for each competency, let's look at where we think we are. Let's look at what the characteristics are of the higher levels and decide where we want to be. So you might be at level 200 and say you want to get to level 300. And then what do you do? What do you want to focus on over the next X months in order to get better at that particular competency? So this all fits into the Microsoft 365 community documents, which is one of the efforts of the P&P team. So it's part of a broad effort that is separate from Microsoft, but very connected to Microsoft. I have meetings with the docs team on a regular basis. They're very aware of what's going on with the articles and what we're trying to accomplish, but it's separate from Microsoft. In other words, we think about things in a slightly different way than they do. It's not about let's push this product. It's not about let's make sure we get user MAU, monthly active users, up for this particular quarter. It's about how can we look at the set of tools that we have, how can we look at the processes that we have inside our organization and actually get better at things.
Yeah, a quick question regarding that, Mark. And I'm sorry, I wanted to ask you this, but I answered a few questions in the chat. I hope I didn't miss the answer. But you mentioned at the beginning the SharePoint maturity model, and that you're based on that. So why did you create the maturity model based on the SharePoint maturity model?
Well, and I'll talk a little bit more about it when maybe the next slide. Let me see what the next slide is. I should know. Yeah, so really all of this thanks for setting me up.
Oh, and one quick question before we move forward. I see some people in the chat asking, what is PNP?
Patterns and practices. So if you don't know about PNP, you're probably working way too hard. I hate it when people ask about what is PNP. We'd like to think that everybody knows about it right now. So the patterns and practices team is something that was started by Vesa Juvonen. And he's a Superman, and a lot of things don't happen in this space unless he's involved. He gets stuff done. So the patterns and practices team is, again, separate from Microsoft. It's a lot of people who are MVPs and heavy, sort of heavy duty contributors, and we're offering things that Microsoft doesn't build, but they sanction, or they at least say that that this is good stuff. So for instance, if you're a developer, there are samples in the PNP world that help you get things built. This is a sort of a softer effort in that it's more document based, but there's just a lot there. And if we'll make sure that the PNP there's a PNP homepage, which I should know the link to off the top of my head.
We'll share it. We'll make sure it's included in the slides, I think, at the end, and we'll make sure to include it in the email we send with the recording.
Yeah. So to your question about, why did we base this on the SharePoint maturity model? Well, the SharePoint maturity model itself was based on a software, the capability maturity model that was actually devised by at Carnegie Mellon University back in the 80s, I think. And the idea being, and this is actually very technology focused. It was the idea being that, as a development organization, you wanted to make sure that you were continually improving and moving up this sort of stack of levels. They use a 1 to 5 level numbering scheme. We did 100 to 500 because we found that people often wanted to say, well, I'm at 1.25, so we just made it a little bit easier. We use hundreds. So, if you think about level 100 is, that organization that takes their file shares and drops them into a document library, that to me is a level 100 organization. They haven't actually thought about, well, what does this platform do for us that's better? How can we think about this content that we have that we've put into Microsoft 365 and take advantage of the tools and capabilities of the platform in order to help our organization work better. It's not about using the technology, it's about the outcomes, right? Level 200 is managed. So you're starting to think about documenting processes. You're starting to be less reactive. If you're an IT organization that seems like you're playing whack-a-mole 100% of the time, you're probably more at a level 100. Level 100 is very reactive. Level 200, you start to be a lot more managed. You start to be a bit more proactive. Level 300 defined. You've got some pretty good processes in place. People understand how to get stuff done. You're able, as the owners of the platform, to go out and help people think about new ways to be more effective and more efficient. You're actually spending time going out into the organization and teaching them this stuff proactively. At level 400, you're starting to measure things. You're starting to understand what is it that, what is our special sauce using this platform, and how can we measure it and encourage it and control it where we need to. If you're this is one of the areas where organizations are just going to act differently based on what they do. If you're in a highly regulated industry, the way you think about getting to level 400 may be very different than if you're in a very creative industry. You're just going to have a different mindset around control. Some organizations are not about control. Believe it or not, those of you in a regulated industry, there are organizations that are really freewheeling and let people do a lot of the things that would be appalling in your organization. And then at level 500, it's all about optimization. You're continually reevaluating the way you're doing things. Everything is humming along at such a good clip that you can spend a lot of time revisiting all of the decisions you've made and continuously improving what you're doing. And that level is a tough one to get to because everything has to be humming along really, really well. And if you think about, how many fires you put out this week, you probably aren't at that level. So So this is just the general progression of a maturity model, and you see maturity models out there in the marketplace about just about everything. I mean, if there isn't one for grocery shopping, I'm sure somebody will come up with one. I mean, this idea is applied to a lot of different things.
And a quick question for you, Mark. The and I know, I guess it's part of your answer is going to be it's not really that important in the sense that it's okay to be at a 100, it's okay to be at a 300, but where do you see most kind of companies fitting in there? Like how many companies would you see actually being at a 500? So people have kind of like maybe an idea of where they stand.
Sure. I think the answer is absolutely it depends. Every consultant's favorite answer.
Yeah,
right?
consultant answer.
But if you think about level 500, you're talking there most often of organizations like Boeing or NASA. These massive organizations that can invest incredibly large amounts of money into all of the other stuff that allows that optimization to happen. And so you don't always, in most cases, most organizations I work with would never want to be that high up on everything. And again, remember that all of these, each of these levels applies to each of the competencies too, which I haven't gotten to yet. But there's the sort of general organizational maturity level, but that you should really think about that as being built up based on the sort of sum of the parts of the individual competencies. So this slide here goes into a little bit more detail about what those levels are. And I think that if you start at the bottom of this particular slide and you sort of read up and you're thinking, okay, are we like this? Are we like this? Are we like this? You'll get to a point where you sort of have to stop. And that's where you live, just from a general perspective. And that'll be true of each of the competencies too. So it's not necessarily a highly quantitative thing. I think in most cases it's more of a quantitative or qualitative thing, not numbers, qualities, right? So again, you want to improve your organization through the use of technology. I probably have said a lot of this stuff already. You want to benchmark things. So you always want to know where are we starting? If we say, okay, in this we're level 200, then that tells you we've started there and now we're going to move forward from there. You want to think about what your approach is to get better. You want to come up with a roadmap. Again, sort of what's the sequencing when you look at these competencies? What's the most important set of problems to solve first versus, well, we'll do that in a year or two. A lot of this is driven by culture and organizational structure and whether you're a regulated industry or not. What statutory reasons do you have to do things? You want to make sure that you're including senior management in all of this. This is sort of a holistic, all enterprise, all organization set of thinking that you want to make sure that everybody who is going to have something to say about it is along for the ride. And then you want to make sure that everybody sort of understands what the needs and objectives are so that as you're moving forward, they can sort of go along with you. It's not just the technology, absolutely not the technology, as I probably said about 5 times, because it's really important to understand that. So the approach here is, again, and I'm going to go a little faster because I know that we've got only a certain amount of time, but again, we're sort of trying to be nonpartisan. We're not driven by today's features in, say, Teams. We're not saying, well, because Teams does this, you should go out and do that. It's more about what are we trying to accomplish, and therefore, how can we use Teams? That seems like such a subtle distinction, but it really is. Start with outcome first, and then think technology. Don't think about technical capability, and then decide what you're going to do. We want to make sure that you're understanding the current state in your organization so that you understand where you want to go. So I've said a lot about competencies. These are the competencies that we've broken things down into, and this is all a work in progress. So the purple ones, the one that says published competencies, those are the articles that we've already gotten out there. So how should you think about search within your organization? We had a practitioner's call earlier this month with Agnes Molnar to talk about search and maturity with search. you know, when we talk about collaboration or communication, how do you think about doing those things well inside your organization? So this isn't the whole organization doing everything view. This is looking at each individual competency so that we can decide, you know, for content management, for example, we want to get to a level 400. But when it comes to staff and training, you know, we're a little different. We're gonna decide that we're gonna be at a level 200. There's no good or bad there as long as you're making the decisions cognizantly, right? If you haven't made the decision and you're landing at a level 100, then that's a problem. If you know you're there and that's where you want to stay, then that's fine. Again, it's a framework. It's not something where we're dictating. The open competencies are things that we're working on. We've just recently realized, I mean, we've sort of realized all of this about 12 times, but we've realized that we need to talk about compliance as a specific competency. We've woven things into each of the competencies. So Larry, when you were asking me about governance earlier, we don't have a governance competency. We've tried to weave it through these other competencies. So content management is one of the ones where governance is really important. You know, if you've got content that you have to push through a process, that process has to work and you have to support it with the technologies. And then we have some supporting articles, you know, the how to elevate articles specifically are, okay, if I'm at level 200 in collaboration, what do I need to do to get to level 300? So it's taking the competency definitions and sort of turning it on its side a little bit and helping you understand what the specific actions are that you need to take to get to the next level. This is a snazzy looking spreadsheet. It's just a screenshot from a spreadsheet that we'll make sure that you get access to when the recording goes out. This is a spreadsheet you can use to sort of track your progress, and it helps you think about, for each of the competencies, which are across the top here, you know, where are you starting out? You know, so in 2021, if your management of content, you decide that you're at a 240 level. And you know, you're gonna come up with this sort of qualitatively. There's no scorecard, there's no checklist, but you're gonna decide where you are. And then, of course, you want to set some targets. You know, where should we be and when, right? And then in 2022, you revisit that score and say, okay, where do we think we are now? And hopefully we've moved the needle if that's something we've decided to focus on. So this is a tool that can help you figure out where you are, where you're going, and how you're doing over time. And I've noticed that in the screenshot, I've really messed up how I spelled collaboration there. There's no 9 in collaboration since the last
happens
time.
To the best of us.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is a tool that you can use, and I would, just like the framework, I would suggest that you take this tool and do with it what makes sense, right? I mean, it's not necessarily going to be perfect for you. There's more to it than this, by the way, but it's not going to be perfect for you, but it's a way to think about starting to track your progress on this journey. And I think every organization ought to think about it a little bit differently, right? Maybe you come up with how do you think about scoring yourselves? How do you think about breaking things down into components? Might be a little bit different for each organization, and that's okay.
Nice. A willingness to learn is key to increasing your organization's cloud maturity. Because I think obviously everyone being here shows a great willingness to learn, right? Everybody took an hour out of their day to learn about everything and learn some insight. But when we talk about a willingness to learn, like how do we see that fitting in, I guess, in the broader sense of an organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, this maturity model, you know, the ideas behind it mean that you sort of got to be striving for something better, or at least acknowledging that you're where you are and you're going to stay there. And so in order to get better, you have to learn new things. You can't sit still. You can't, as an organization, not think about, well, what are the skills here and what skills are we weak on? We need to bring things up, you know, in the people and I'm drawing a blank. There's a competency for people and a word. And so, you know, how do you support
communities?
People and communities. Thank you very much, Larry. So, you know, how do you support the people in your organization and bring up their skills so that you can accomplish what you want with the other competencies? So it's sort of the, you know, a shark that doesn't keep swimming dies, right? You've got to keep learning. I had somebody tell me once, a 30-year-old twerp said to me, I've learned everything I need to know. I don't need to do anything new in my job. I'm just going to stay here until I retire. And I thought, wow, what a sad existence that is. This is not that, right? This is a continual learning and understanding effort that you're going to be going on. And really, I mean, whether you use this framework or not, I think that should be the case when you're using a technology like Microsoft 365. The way organizations work is evolving, and therefore you need to evolve, and that means you're learning stuff. So from a high level, what are you going to do? You're going to understand your organization's strategy. You can't look at these competencies or look at you know, where you want to be in the maturity model just in isolation. You want to make sure that you know, what are we supposed to be good at our organization? You know, what are the things that really matter? What are going to drive our strategic success? So that's an underpinning that's really important. I used to work at a company where the balanced scorecard was actually essentially invented there. And so helping everyone understand where they fit into the strategy of the organization is a really important thing. You know, if security is like a primary numero uno thing for your organization, maybe you're in the security business, then you probably need to be a level 500. If security is something that matters, but it isn't like your business, maybe level 300, right? But you can't understand that unless you understand the strategy of the organization. So then you're going to take a good hard look at what your organization does well. You know, what are you doing well? And you've got to be honest with yourself and say what you're doing poorly. It doesn't work to just say, oh, we're level 500 at everything. Everybody stop asking us questions, because you'll be lying. And you won't have any room for improvement. You know, you do want to look at, well, where are the fires every day? What is it that we're not doing well? What do we know that we need to be able to do better as an organization? Agree on what competencies you want to improve and in what order. So come up with that roadmap, make a plan and ways to measure your progress against that plan. If you can come up with concrete measures like, you know, number of people who visit the intranet homepage, if that metric actually indicates something that's going to matter, then make sure that you're tracking those metrics. You need to think about what metrics you need to put in place, or what metrics do you have already running that will help you understand where you're going. So when we're talking about, you know, going from one level to another, and I know that we're running out of time here, Larry.
That's all right.
That, you know, you know, here's some specific things that you can think about, you know, when it comes to elevating your collaboration effort, right? So you have to make sure you put in clear guidelines for how tools should be used. You have to have naming conventions. You think about sensitivity labels. This kind of very specific charted out stuff is in the article that talks about how do you go, you know, what levels exist for collaboration. Similarly with communication, and you notice the columns here are different because as we've thought about what it is that is important to enable collaboration, it's not necessarily the same stuff that enables communication. So we've tried to break things down into their piece parts and have some common themes within those competencies as well. I'll just keep going here. So I think one of the things that happens is that a lot of organizations struggle with what's called adoption, because they've built something without thinking about it first, or they've rolled out a set of tools without understanding what the outcome should be. So always make sure that, you know, when you're thinking about rolling out the platform, that you know what it is, what can you build, what can you roll out that's going to get people a benefit, and that will then guarantee adoption, right? Build the right stuff or expose the right tools and educate people on the use of those tools, and people will use the tools because they realize it's going to make their job better and easier than it has been in the past. If you just say, here's Microsoft 365, and then you wonder why no one's using it, it's because they don't see a benefit. You haven't demonstrated anything to them. So that's really important. So, you know, some of the things that you can do is you can look at the pain points in people's work days. You know, find out what it is that people are struggling with and try and solve those problems. Think about where in the competencies it's going to, you know, you can sort of chart a path that's going to make people's lives better. Turn on self-serve so that you're not constraining people from using the tools that you're paying for already. But think about, you know, mindfully turning on self-serve. Maybe there's a little bit of a process to get a new team, for example, but you're still letting them request stuff. Help your users make the right decisions. They don't know what those decisions should be. They don't know what these tools do unless we as technology people explain to them. And then make sure that you're monitoring and continually improving. Again, moving up that maturity model where it makes sense. So I'm going to put up this slide, which is way uglier. Whoops, way uglier than the ShareGate folks would ever let me do. But I edited this at the last minute. This is a lot of those links that I was talking about. And if there's anything missing, we'll make sure we add it. But you know, this is an open source effort. We want everybody to contribute in whatever way they want, or just use the model if that's more your cup of tea. So there are a lot of links here to figure out how you can get involved, how you can contribute to the process, how you can kick in ideas. We love constructive criticism. Just telling us we're wrong about something doesn't really get you much of a conversation. But you know, what can we do better, and how can we expand things based on what you see in your organization? Questions?
Questions. Almost on time. Good. I think. Thanks a lot, Mark, for going over this with us. Now is the time to ask your questions. We already have a few questions to ask Mark, but if you've got anything that you're wondering about, whether it's in regards to exactly to what Mark presented or anything that relates to that, don't be shy. Go ahead, ask your questions. There are no bad questions to ask. And while people are typing in their questions, Mark, I had a quick question for you regarding I guess the difference between I guess what Microsoft already offers and the cloud, because the cloud maturity the cloud maturity model, because they've got a lot of resources out there
Right.
when it comes to adoption and technology rollout. What makes this different?
Yeah, I mean, they have a whole adoption, you know, adoption.microsoft.com, and Caruana Gatima is one of the owners of that. And we are absolutely not trying to like fight with that. Their approach from a Microsoft perspective, though, is naturally different than it would be inside your organization, right? They want you to use their products. They want to sell more licenses. They actually do want everyone's organization to improve. They really do. I mean, I'm not saying that their motives are wrong, but they are slightly different. And I think what we're trying to do with the maturity model is look across product, something that Microsoft, as a very large organization, sometimes struggles with. We're trying to say, well, you know, when you talk about collaboration or you talk about communication, it's not just one thing. It's a lot of different technologies that you could bring to bear. You know, task management is part of collaboration, so maybe Planner as opposed to just SharePoint or Teams or whatever. So our slant is different because we're outside that organization. We're not building the stuff, we're using the stuff. And so I think it's just a different perspective. And I think both have great value. If you're sort of new to the technologies, looking at Microsoft's adoption site is an excellent starting point, because you wouldn't know necessarily what questions you'd want to ask and what you'd want to get more mature about until you actually, you know, sort of go from step one to step whatever, and you have some of these tools in place.
Cool, perfect. Thank you. I'll go ahead and start. We had a little flurry of questions here, so I'll start from the top. Tammy asks us, with a lean staff, how do you figure out the security, configuration, and governance quickly so you can roll out the apps people want? But we get stuck at the governance point a lot.
Right. I think there's a lot of fear that if we give people stuff, they're going to do bad things. And that's where a lot of those conversations go. And I think what you want to try and do is weigh the the potential benefits against the potential dangers. Security is always important. The platform itself is very secure. The Microsoft 365 has been certified. If you go to the Microsoft Trust Center, you can read all of the certifications it's gotten. I can't even remember any of them. There's so many of them. So you have to trust the platform to actually be quite secure from step one. And then you need to think about, well, what are the actual not fears, what are the actual concerns? What are our security requirements, not our fears, right? It's not, well, what if? It's what do we actually care about? What does our organization need from a strategy standpoint, right? Not just, geez, I think people are going to do stuff. And then let people make their mistakes and figure out where you need to build fences around things, because something isn't not necessarily gone horribly awry, but maybe you realize, oh, we need to train people more on this, or we need to give them a little bit more guidance when it comes to this. Also, be very open to act as internal consultants. When people want to use these tools and they need assistance, don't demand that they have some budget and that they can't talk to you. Even a lean team, you can have a 5 or 10 minute conversation and say, well, I think you should do that in Teams, and here's an article I would suggest, and sort of help people get on their way, and let them help themselves. I've consulted to organizations where the SharePoint team or the Microsoft 365 team is 1 or 2 or 3 people for tens of thousands of people. And it's amazing what you can get done if you focus.
Great, perfect, great question. The next question is from an anonymous listener who asks, how do you streamline the mind of a business to think in this way and gain maturity? I mean, as an UC specialist, is really the driver of the business strategy. Any best practices appreciated?
Yeah, I think socialization of the ideas is a very big part of this, and that's why I talked about bringing in senior management somehow. You want to certainly think about, can you find a champion for this? If you can't find a senior manager who believes the organization ought to do better, perform better and accomplish things better, then maybe you're working in an organization that has bad senior management, because that's really what they're concerned about, right? So try to find a champion, and then think of, sort of chart out a path with them, or a steering committee is even better, where you've got people from across the organization, and talk about specifically how you're going to socialize this stuff with the organization. Everybody doesn't need to know about every bit and piece of it, but back when we were all working in offices, people would put up little tent cards on cafeteria tables. We're doing this on the intranet next week. Isn't this cool? That kind of socialization actually really, really helps your sort of lead your organization down a way of thinking that maybe isn't common. And it's especially hard right now because we're all working from home, or we're hybrid work or whatever, because people don't get together as much. We don't have that water cooler stuff. But I think trying to think about how you can, this is the soft stuff. How can you get people to think along the same lines based on some cultural change is hard to do, but it's absolutely possible.
Great, perfect. I guess the next question is from Nicole, and she asks, are there any case studies or organizations that have tried this approach? I guess referring to the maturity model.
It's interesting, because when people take a model like this and use it internally, they tend not to talk about it publicly. It's like saying, well, can you show us a bunch of intranets that you've built? Well, no, because they're intranets, and so they're secret. So I don't know that there are any. We as a team certainly don't have any case studies or white papers or anything. But I think that if you research the concept of maturity models and how they can be applied to just about anything, you'll find all kinds of good good stuff out there in the literature. I mean, this model from Carnegie Mellon has been around, like I said, I think it was the either late 70s or early 80s, and the concept of maturity models has proliferated across lots of industries since then. So I think that the core concepts are absolutely valuable, and just sort of the specifics of how we're applying them to Microsoft 365 are relatively new.
1986, I think.
There you go.
Spying at your meeting notes. All right, so next up, another anonymous listener asks, how do you improve level of competency when Microsoft keeps changing things, decommissioning products and launching new ones? We can't keep up.
Well, don't think about the products. Think about what it is you're trying to accomplish, right? So, for example, if one of your key strategic goals is to streamline data entry and I/O basically, well, maybe you decided to use InfoPath years and years and years ago. Microsoft has deprecated InfoPath. They actually killed it. Maybe it's dead, but it's still around, whatever. But you know that Power Apps are now available. Always think about, well, how can we go from where we are to where we think that the marketplace is going? That's a very clear progression. Microsoft isn't out there killing products because they just think it's fun. Some of them do. But it's because technology, the technology world changes, and the tools that they have to build things change. So I think if you focus on the outcomes instead of the specific tools, and try to stay abreast of where Microsoft is going, and there's a bit of a reading the tea leaves there. I mean, this is part of what I do for a living, is try to read those tea leaves, and hope that you can stay well enough informed so that you understand the general direction, and see how it aligns with what your organization needs. But I think that's the key, right? It's about your organization and its needs, and then you look at the technologies and try and figure out which ones to use.
Perfect. Next up, we have Jason asking, how do you deal with inefficiencies in the product, even though they've been released to the public? So, for example, retention policies often being orphaned, planner cannot be restored once deleted.
I think you just have to work with the constraints that there are. Those two examples. I mean, I think we can always. So for example, when I write code, sometimes I run into APIs that just don't do something that we want, and it's very frustrating. And you're like, well, how the hell am I going to get this to work? And then either you come up with a workaround, or you decide that you can live without that particular piece of functionality. So I think, again, what is required in your organization for a very clear reason, as opposed to let's look at what's wrong with the platform. There are always going to be things that are wrong with the platform. There are always going to be gaps. Microsoft is working really, really hard, and I honestly believe this. I mean, I talk to people at Microsoft all the time, and they're working really, really hard to try and make things like APIs and retention labels and restore points and things like that consistent across all of the products. But they're a very large organization, and every part of their organization is sort of at a different maturity level, because when you start a new product, you're going to be at a different maturity level than something like Outlook, which has been around for, I don't know, 40 years at this point, probably. Right. So you just have to work with it. There are, I'm not telling you there won't be frustrations, because there absolutely are. I mean, I can tell you that we all curse Microsoft every once in a while, and they probably curse us every once in a while, but it's a reality that we just need to adapt to.
Good. So we're coming up on time for the webinar. So I know a lot of you will have to jump to another meeting or whatnot. I don't know about you, Mark, if you've got a hard stop right now, if you can go on for like 2 or 3 minutes. I think we've got like a handful of questions, like 2 or 3 questions left.
I could do a few more questions, sure.
Yeah. If for those of you who can stick around, I'll repeat. We will be sending you the recording. So if you did ask your questions or you're curious to learn more, you will be able to listen to Mark's answers once you receive the recording. All right, on to the next one. The next one is, do you have any other examples of metrics which can be used to measure levels of Microsoft 365 adoptions beyond MAU, especially in larger organizations?
Sure. When you look, if you look at that spreadsheet that that I put a screenshot up from, one of the sheets shows a way to break down each of the competencies into more specific things that you can sort of gauge yourself on. I think that'll help. I think if you read the articles also, there's some ideas there about what you might want to measure, what things that you could use as indicators of your progress. There are all kinds of quantitative ways you could do it. You can do things like export the audit log and throw it into Power BI and see exactly what people are doing. But a lot of the indicators of success are softer things. Are people feeling happier about their job? And I know that sounds really dumb, but if we're rolling out a platform like this and people start to hate their job more, we're not doing it right. Right? If they feel like we're providing them great tools and their day is going better, then that's going to be reflected in their job satisfaction. So you're always going to want to think about what is it we're trying to succeed at, and what metric can we come up with to indicate whether or not we're doing a good job with that.
Perfect. How do you maybe one last one? I think we're coming up on the questions at the end of the list of the questions. How do you inspire your employees to aim to the next step of the maturity model?
Well, I think there a big part of that sort of boils down to incentives, right? And that's again why I think it's important to get some senior management involved. A lot of time with efforts like this, the incentives, the tangible incentives, lag the actual effort, right? So if we say we want to help everyone be more efficient by managing their content better, if that's not part of their incentive structure, then they're not necessarily going to want to do a better job at that unless it serves them as a human being, right? But if we're paying them more for doing that thing, which tends to lag from be a lagging indicator, in that it takes a few years for that stuff to sort of percolate, then we might struggle a little bit more. I think again, as part of that, getting upper management aligned, getting them to say this is what we want people to do, and we're going to do it. It's not enough to say thou shalt. You have to get them to demonstrate the behaviors they want. And then you also have to do that socialization so that it just becomes a cool thing to do. Some of that softer stuff is really what makes or breaks efforts like this a lot of the time.
Wonderful. All right, I think that's all the time we have. We don't want to take too much of your time. So yeah, a huge thank you, Marc, for taking the time to do this with us and share your insight with all of us.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks very much. I hope that this maturity model is intriguing to people on the call. If there are any questions or comments or whatever, hopefully you'll call this number below. I don't know exactly what you'll send out, but again, this is an open source effort. So the links on that slide I went past are ways to get in touch with us, and we'd love to get your thoughts. We'd love to carry on these conversations. There's a link to a discussion that you could join. I mean, this is very much a work in progress. It's a community effort, so we're all in this together.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We will be sending you the recording, all the links that you will need to get started working on the maturity model. Links also to contact the Marc and the team if you have any questions. We apologize for those because I see that my comment about us taking a few extra questions sparked a few little last-minute questions, but unfortunately, we won't have the time to go through all of them. Perhaps we'll try to get some answers from Marc if we can offline and try to send those answers to you.
Why don't you gather those together, and we'll see if we can write out some stuff.
Perfect. So we'll do that. And thanks again. Keep an eye open in your inbox or maybe your Clutter for the recording. And until next time, have a great holidays to everyone, and we'll see you in 2022. All right, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.